Don't do that to me. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to introduce to you Charles Faulkner, a trainer who has been in the field for 24 years and who has done lots of research in the field of human excellence. He's written various books, he's done tapes, he's done video stuff, and he's been training here for as long as I have been here and much longer. So please welcome Mr. Charles Faulkner.
Let him go out, let him go out. You awaken on a train. It's happened before. You dozed off, and now you're in a new place. You can feel the movement. Hear the conductor, tickets! You got your tickets? And what do you notice? Do you first gaze outside? Or do you look to see around you? Maybe you have a new partner next to you or a passenger just across the aisle. Are you thinking about what you're going to get to do? Are you wondering where you are and looking for some sort of signpost or some way to figure out where in your journey? You awaken on a train. It's not the first time. First time happened much younger in life. Most of us don't remember back when we were 2 or 3. A few do. I think it's amazing. Most of us come into consciousness somewhere 5, 6, 7, depends on the person. They begin to realize, you know, I like chocolate ice cream and baseball. And on rainy days, I like to read Rod Serling. We discover we prefer certain kinds of experiences. And as our lives roll forward, these begin to show up more and more. Until after a while, you know certain people, you go into town with them, and you go, well, that person is going to the bookstore. All right? Somebody else you know, we'll see them when they're done shopping. Somebody else goes, I'm going to walk around, I'm going to walk all the way to the end and around and up into the hills and back. Somebody else says, you know, I want to find a nice place just to sit down, be peaceful for a while, sort of take in the new atmosphere. Now, we think of these as just preferences, or maybe we don't think just as preferences. We say, that's the kind of guy I am, yeah. I like chocolate ice cream, going outdoors and hiking. Thinking about important stuff. Somebody else looks and goes, what a waste of time. All the other things you could do, you could be going from place to place and traveling. Why have one thing that you like when there's something new on the horizon? When I go to a restaurant, I order what I don't know on the menu. And if I can't figure it out, that's the one. And you know what's really important in life? I mean, besides that experience of new things, it's people. I mean, it doesn't matter where I am. It's the people that make the change in me. I'm different people with different people. I have a wide variety of friends, and that makes a difference. I go sailing with this guy in the Mediterranean, and we have these conversations and all this culture, all these things happening. This other guy lives up in the mountains, almost like a hermit. He's got this wall of trees and rock up behind his place. We go out there and we sit down and we're just being together, two guys. We have all these preferences, all these ways of expressing who we are. And yet, is that who we are? Are we our preferences? Well, if you weren't your preferences, what would you be? How would you know? A lot less of this is a matter of choice than we think. And this is where we get to the NLP of it. Neuro-linguistic programming. Now, some people don't like that, it's neuro-linguistic programming. I happen to like the programming part. I was programmer. I'm sure you can't imagine. Revenge of the Nerds. And I never got to be a nerd. They wouldn't let me into the club, you know. And I can program. No, you can't. And what programming is to say is a set of instructions. So if there's a mistake in the instructions and you just change the mistake, then the program runs fine. I really like that metaphor because there's nothing about people being good or bad or broken. It's just about changing a little bit of instruction. And of course, you know, things happen. We weren't paying attention. We missed the turn, right? We didn't get off the train on our stuff. We go back. It's easy to change. The neuro part, the idea that we can't have a thought without activating our neurology. You've seen all the, not all of them, I'm sure, but you've seen some of the CAT scans and PET scans and brain scans now, and how the different areas activate with different types of activities, and how language is located, and how the frontal lobes are more about moral decision making and the way they relate to each other. Yeah. And then there's this linguistic stuff. Because remember, we're engaged in neuro-linguistic. For something to get into our work, we're making the following claim, that there's a connection between what the neurology is doing and what the language is doing. Now, this places us in a very different place than so-called psychologies, actual psychologies, and New Age stuff. For example, you take something like Freud. I mean, you can't take him, he's gone, but he had these ideas, which were badly translated, by the way, of the id, the ego, and the superego. So the id was really the I. It was the part of the person that they identified with. Okay. The id was the part of the person that had the drives and the desires and so forth that the person didn't identify with. And the superego, a way of understanding it anyway, would be the moral structure of the society as it got into the person. So in a sense, it's a pretty useful model. What do you identify with? What don't you identify with but you have a relationship to? It's like not admitting that you like chocolate ice cream, right? But then you go and you buy some and you look around, hope nobody's looking, you know. My id made me do it. Or the superego, the monitoring part, you shouldn't have ice cream after 8 o'clock. In fact, you should put it in a bowl first. The thing is, how do you know how much of each of those a person has? And you could talk about any number of psychological models. About some are developmental, some models are about the certain conflicts of forces inside a person. How would you know how much happiness a person has? Say in a state-based model. This really puts NLP in a different category because what we say is that we can listen and watch, and from the linguistic behavior of words, from the grammar of that structure, and from the grammar of the body, which, by the way, neuroscience is finally proving, if that's the right word, demonstrating, finding that what John Grinder and Richard Bandler discovered so many years ago, and of course Erickson, Milton H. Erickson, and Virginia Seard knew before them, is the case. Nonverbal leads verbal. The person will show you behaviorally the grammar of their inner thoughts before they say them. As we say in Chicago, the fix is in. How that bears on this section is that we are very much concerned about that connection, that neuro-linguistic, because we can actually notice in a moment-to-moment interaction what the person's paying attention to by the choice of words that they use and by the grammatical structures. And this takes us into certain features of this connection that appear to be in everyone. Everyone. We call these the meta-programs. Now, let's take that sentence I started out with. You awaken on a train. First part, subject. We have a verb, and we have a conjunct. We have a relationship here, preposition, train. Now, English, along with Chinese and several other languages, is what we call an SVO language. That means a subject, verb, object language. That means that even if you don't say the subject, you've got one. This is what goes in the idea of deletion. You remember this, the universal modeling principles of deletion, generalization, and distortion? We'll go further in this. Right now, deletion. Even if you take away the you, if I turn and I go, awaken on a train, we know that in linguistics you have to put in, and most people put themselves in. They think, oh, I'm awakening on a train, or he's awakening on a train. So we have a subject here. And we have a verb. You awaken on a train, you sleep on a train, you dance on a train, you boogie woogie. Doesn't matter what word we put there, you're going to say, well, yeah, that's a verb. That's an action, an activity. And then you're not actually on the train, are you? This is a curious kind of thing in language. We'll get more into this later. You're actually in the train. But for reasons that are not entirely clear, we seem to sort things out. Sometimes you awaken on a train. That would be a surprise. That word train, that's our object. And even if I left it off, just the nature of our language, English in this case, you would wonder, I say you awaken. And a number of you would fill in your own picture, wouldn't you? You'd go, you awaken. And you might think, yeah, I awaken here in Winter Park, or I awaken in my bed. These are what we call grammatical items. They have to be there. Now, what's interesting here is, and we all know this from our early grammar training, I think this is like the first hurdle. I think John and Richard, when they were designing the field, they did this on purpose, is if you remember Structure of Magic, Book 1, they put the cover, and it's got Structure of Magic. That often, you know how that ends up in the magic, children's, or occult section? Have you ever found that? Yeah. It's Structure of Magic, but they got a little wizard on there, you know. And then you open it up, and you start to flip through it, and it's generative transformational grammar. I mean, are these guys a tease or what? Because they're going, fun, hard thinking. So this first leap is that grammar can be useful. It wasn't just something to torture you when you were young, even though it was used for that. You want to put those memories way back there, far away, because what you want to get now is that this is like a Chinese menu. One from column S, one from column V, one from column O. In fact, if we start to fill in, we have the U, and if there's a U, then what's there got to be? A me. Thank you, Ron. We'll get to that soon. Let's say there's I, okay? Okay, so there's you and there's I, or there's I and there's you. Funny how we can keep that straight. Okay, so, and what else is there? They, okay. They is just more of yous, right? Plural. Okay, and we, that's just more of I's, right? Now, he, okay, we got a he, and of course, a she. And when you can't tell at a distance, we got an it. And if you start to look at this as a category, you go, well, you know, that's actually pretty easy. There aren't that many choices there. And if you just take a moment in the way we do in this field, the neurolinguistics of it, well, there's I, and then there's you, an imaginary you in this case, Ron, if you will. Yeah. And Ron goes, there's me, and there's you. Now I'm feeling like Ron. Now, me, did I get that right? Me, right. Because the neurolinguistic, if we put our neurology, our body, our physiology in the same posture, then I would say, or be more likely to say, the same kind of things Ron would say. Me, yeah, I like that. I, me. Let me get a look at that. Perceptual positions. So we have this idea in neurolinguistic programming of perceptual positions. Now, let's go back a moment. Perceptual position is simply from where you view things, as one of my colleagues calls it, from where you view things. And in fact, you can view things from millions of different places. This didn't originate with NLP. It didn't even originate with Fritz Perls and Gestalt therapy, who made this up, that I know of. And it probably goes back further than that. And you've got Martin Buber and the I and the thou, and how you need both. And Hegel talks about you can't have a self without there being others. And there's the stories of the feral children. You know, a feral child. These are kids that were lost out in the forests. This happened more often in the Middle Ages and the 17th century and so forth, earlier on. And they would find them as adults. And they had no contact with people since they were small, but somehow had survived. And what they discovered over time was that if the child had not interacted with other adults before puberty, that the brain, because you know the brain changes at puberty. There's the Manillan sheet that's over the whole brain, and it solidifies up there. Before that, it's quite loose, mobile fluid. And if they didn't, then that person couldn't abstract. One of the last ones they found was in France, The Wild Boy of Avignon, I believe. And a wonderful movie by Francois Truffaut. Black and white, but a wonderful movie about the education of this child, now an adult. And he could do stuff like a dog could do. He knew his name, he knew sit, he could learn to use utensils, but he couldn't abstract. And while he had an affection for the doctor who cared for him and educated him along with a young assistant, that he was never able to talk about another time. He couldn't refer out of the present. That there's something about us interacting with each other that we begin to actually create a language which is both biological and social. And we begin to make distinctions that our language gives us, so that we understand that there's an I and a you, or a I and a you. And again, coming to the perceptual position, we could perceive the world from the bottom corner of that chair, from the light up there, from the camera over there, from the clock, from your eyes and from your eyes, and also from your shoe. There's millions and millions of angles of perception, and listening as well. And yet you can class them into three. Three that prove to be more useful than all those millions. And those three would be the I, which would be from the self. And from the other, because we found, now that we're the dominant species on this planet, that we pay attention to who the people are going into a situation. And if there's no people there, we treat it differently than if it is. And if there are friendly people there, we treat it differently than if there's not friendly people there. You think? Yeah, of course. Because this is our species. We're the home team. Friendly primates. And not so friendly primates at times. So, perceptual position of self. perceptual position of other, and all those other perspectives that are possible, well, we know they're not you, and we know they're not me, or in your case, we know they're not I, and we know they're not me. We can class those all as observing in some way you or me, or you or me. An observer. Now, I bring this up because there's the neuro-linguistic connection. If somebody's going, well, Cynthia Hamel, I don't know if you know this author or not, title of the book really is this, but enough about you. Now, what do you think that might indicate about this person? You know, I'm so glad to hear that about you. Now let me tell you more about myself. That we can tell both by the number of times the person uses which one of these, the self, the other, the observer, how often their neuro-linguistic, their neurology, their thoughts, their representations are being activated in terms of this distinction. So the first would be number. Another is the intensity that they bring to it. We know from the work of Dr. Milton Erickson that people will mark things out. Somebody asks you, you know, would you like the chocolate ice cream or the vanilla? I don't know, which would you like? He may say vanilla, but what was I doing? I was emphasizing non-verbally. I could emphasize with my voice. In the same way, the intensity with which somebody says, I think, let me tell you what I think. Well, I know what to do about this situation in the world today. Now, these candidates, they don't know anything. Let me tell you a little bit. Me and I could be interchangeable here, right, Ron? Absolutely. So another way to think about this is that the intensity with which a word is used. Now, one more way to detect what the person might be running through the neurology is how they do the following. And you got to listen careful, Ron. Let's me and you go downtown. Versus, hey, Ron, you want to go downtown later? You notice any difference there? And once again, we're not saying, well, you have this and this and this. We're saying there are these distinctions called speaking from or within, if you will, the self position or the other position, or as an observer. And that we can, by language, by nonverbals, like pointing at myself, like the intensity of voice, by the ranking, or if you will, sequence, the order in which different things are stated, you can say, well, the person at that moment most likely activated their neurology, their thinking patterns. Now, what if somebody lies? Ooh, hadn't thought about that one. Yes, people can try on, they can act other positions. We only have a few multiple dozens of examples on television now with the conventions. I really care about you. you I care about. So people can put on a facade, but in their natural language, they're going to do what, of course, is most familiar. Now, there are people that can have facility at these. I don't mean to imply we do one or the other, but as a way of introducing them, I want to make you aware that the information is available right there in that moment. And that unlike other fields, we can actually count the number of utterances per minute. We can listen for the intensity when one or more of these are used. And we can watch the nonverbals and listen to the ranking. And we can, if we wanted to, make a chart and say, well, this person is spending in the last minute or last hour, this person, I'll do it right here. This person is spending in the last minute or hour, we would say perhaps this much time in the self position, this much time speaking in terms of you, which would sound like what? It's other, so what would it sound like? Because I've been doing a lot of self. Well, for example, what happens if you see, like I don't want to do the pratfall here, but if I were to like go boom and actually like bang something, a number of you might go, ooh, right? Yeah, well, are you okay? Yeah. Well, the thing is that's natural. If you don't, what we say in our field, switch, if you don't shift changes from self to other, you go back, a child, very small, learns that there are other people. And if they don't learn that, and this is from theory of mind, this is the onset of autism. One of the characteristics of autism is the world is objects. If they learn it a little bit but not sufficiently, you get what is labeled a sociopath, someone who treats other people like objects. Whereas those of you that instantly go, oh, are you all right? You kind of wince when you see the pain in me. What you did is you jumped over into the other, which is what we do. I'll give you an example. It's not a pleasant one, but a real one is that you look at the literature. If you look at what's written during a war, or you look at the posters, and I have a collection of the different posters and so forth, of how they dehumanize the enemy in order to make it possible for these young men mostly, and some women now, to actually go out and defend their country, which means sometimes killing other people. That if they really get the other people as people, desertion rates go way up. It's really hard. And that's a good thing. That when they recognize there's another person over there, that ability to step into the other, that's what that's about. And it's a natural ability we're developing. And some of us, though, forget, and some of us say, well, I'm not going to step into that person. I'm not going to take on that pain because I need to be resourceful. I'm an emergency medical technician. I need to stay an observer. It's a choiceful use of that. So in other ways, you hear people will speak from an observer position. Sometimes they'll even use their name for this. Well, Charles thinks that we should. Sounds odd, but it's a way if the person is observing at that point. And they will speak in a flatter tone. You know that? You see the leaning back in the posture. And they'll speak about things over there. And so we have these neurological clues that match up with the linguistic of he, she observing the situation. So by these various clues, we can begin to assemble for any period of time. We'll spend a lot of time in self, some in other, a little in observer, or some other combination. So what? Ron. Would you do me a favor? Sure. Okay, he looks sure. Ron, there's something I think you'd really be interested in. Okay. What's the difference? In the one, I'm appealing to him thinking about me. And in the other, I'm talking in terms of it appealing to him. Just that little linguistic difference. Now, a number of you do a lot of both of these. Why else would you be in a communications course? Why else would you be interested in this stuff if you already didn't know some of it? It's the funniest thing to me that people who already are good at this stuff want to learn to be better. You know, it's the people who go, they're underlings. You can hire them, you can fire them. Oh, that guy, you're fired. You think he's over there imagining how those people are feeling? No. Do you think it might actually be new learning for him to step into other more? Staff that work for the organization, absolutely. And get this, I lived in Japan for a while, 6 months the first time, 5 months the second time, and I started out teaching some English, and I started out working in some companies. By the end, I was advising negotiations and between Japanese companies and foreign companies, foreign like the US. And what I found was that in their way of thinking, you don't really start the negotiation until the leaders on both sides are breathing at the same rate and moving at the same rate. I don't know if you've seen that old Michael Douglas film where if you've seen that old Sean Connery film, and he knows a lot of Japanese people, and they're in the restaurant together, and the guy who's the mover and shaker is picking up his sake, and at the very same moment, Sean Connery's picking up his sake. You know what they say in Japanese about that? They go, oh, shh. Like, he knows. He's rapport building. Because in their culture, it's a matter of formality that you would match the other person. It's part of the structure. We come from a place where we really value people hanging out in the self. And I give you that example because if it can happen between cultures, it can happen between people. And now we're getting an idea of how this might begin to be useful. Because if you've got a limited set, and you can actually listen for it and mark the intensity, then you can begin to say, well, this person hangs out there. So if I want to build rapport and match them, then doing what they do, doing it in that way, would be very useful. And if I want to, as a counselor, as a consultant, as an advisor of some kind, encourage another kind of thinking, expand their world or your own, then you could try on the ones you do less often, knowing that you've got neuro-linguistic ways of doing that. That you can step back and get a view of the situation in your mind or actually physically like I'm showing. That you can go over and get into the posture of somebody else. And of course that's not going to tell you everything, but if you begin to get in the posture and the same kind of shape on the face and so forth, and you begin to go, I get kind of an idea what's going on. Then, of course, you can ask them, are you feeling such and such? Are you in a certain way? Get some feedback going. Learn more about how that person moves through the world. We know that when we build this one up, this other, we go, oh, I know what she'll do. Right? Now, what is that we built? It's intuitive knowledge, but what did we build using a construction metaphor? A model. We built a model. And what do we build that model out of? I know you all have somebody like this. You know what she'll do. You'll know what he'll do, right? Think of a person right now. You know what that person would do. Think of that person right now.
Is that a frequency of
No, actually do this. Stop and think of someone where you know what they'll do. How do you know? Okay, so you've seen a sequence of behavior, right?
Yeah, within that particular context.
All right, you've seen a sequence of behavior. How else could you know? What's that?
our experience.
Well, yes, but your experience of what? Yeah, like what? Behaving in that way before. Okay. Anyone else? Is it anything other than behavior? Right, so it's behavior. So you take a sequence of behavior, and you go, oh, I know what they'll do. What we're here to do this morning is propose a different model, that you can see what they do and translate that into cognitive categories so that you are, in a sense, seeing inside the black box. So that if you knew the person would hang out in themselves, you could drop them into an entirely different situation, one for which their current behavior gives you no guide. And you could make a reasonable prediction, not an absolute fact, but a reasonable prediction what they would do in that entirely new situation. Because you know their mental bias relative to their perceptual position. Does that make sense? Let's do one more. You awaken on a train. You've got your object, and you've got your verb. Which is more important to you? What are you paying more attention to? How would you know? We go back to the idea of number. Later on today, you're going to go outside. It's beautiful around here. And what do? Do you pay attention to what you do? Or is it where you're going? Does it vary? Of course it does. Yet there are habits. You ever go to a group, a party, and you get introduced to people? What do you say? Hi, and then?
My name is.
This is good. Good social graces. Now, then, after this, what do you do? That's nice, too. Well, from around where I come from, which may be a strange place called the U.S., we say, how are you?
Oh, yeah.
How are you? Yeah.
Thank you.
Or we say, hey, Paul, what do you do? Right? Or we say, hi. And what's your name?
Alessandra.
Alessandra. And where are you from?
Italy.
Italy. Oh, it's a marvelous country. So we'll ask questions like, how are you? What do you do? Where are you from? But I could just as easily ask, Ron, what do you know? We do say that sometimes. Or I could come up and I go, Anwar, what do you have? Lots? Yeah, I was surprised you didn't pull your hand away, and I'm going to keep them. It's just a habit of culture. You know what they say in Chinese? You show up at somebody's home. Have you eaten? Not in English, but they say, have you eaten? So there are different cultural biases. So you can be paying more attention to where you are, or what you're doing, or how you are, or what you have, and yet we don't even think about, well, that's what we do. In the words of George Carlin, we got stuff, and we got to have places to put our stuff. And he goes through, as you all know, this routine about getting more, and once they get all the stuff in places, they've got spare room, so they can do what? Get more stuff. Now, that's a humorous story in which country? The U.S., where we have lots of stuff, where we have lots of things. And we're biased towards things. Things will make us happy. The old story that you see the ads, and the guy, you see the ads with the cigarettes and the beautiful girls. You see the ads with the alcohol and the beautiful girls. And there's this guy, and he's like 80 years old, you know, and he's a cigarette, and he's an alcoholic, and he's going, where are the girls? It's made a connection there that wasn't really appropriate. But we have that in our culture, that if you get certain things, you'll get certain states. Don't you love it the way they're now selling these big old man cars with Rolling Stones music? Maybe you haven't heard this, but in the background you're going, yeah, I want to be 16 and drive an oversized Cadillac, because that'll make me feel youthful. Well, maybe it will, because the associations are there. My point is simply that we're inside of a number of biases that make it less likely we're going to notice, unless I take a little time with you and point this out. That if it's all about where you go, where you go, where you go, that's different than, let's go hiking. Hiking, verb. Let's go watch television. It's a kind of activity, but not as much, yeah. Let's go exploring. And you get different responses. Just as if I were to say, let's go to a place inside where we can be peaceful, begin to understand this in a new way. Some of you might go, that's a little new age. But you can hear it in the language. And what I'm getting, the neurolinguistic, let's go to a place inside. So places just aren't outside. And you know, of course, what do people do? They spend thousands of dollars and get on planes for hours and hours and hours to go to a place where they can go, I can finally relax. What's that? You did that to come here. So if we were to begin to try and make sense of these, we might notice that, well, there are objects as in things. And there are activities, as in awaken. And there are places that we go to. And once again, our language is a great assist in this. And that is, people talk about, I want to get into a good state. I want to get to a good state. And we're thinking, Colorado's a pretty good state. That's not what I mean. You know, I want to get into a good state of mind. I want to get into my resources. And I'm going, I didn't realize they were around here. People use this kind of language, and you're hearing about getting into something. It's into a place, even if it's in the mind. Again, neurolinguistic. We can hear the words. We know these associate with what they're doing. So getting to a place in the actual world, getting to a place in terms of emotions or capabilities, getting things, as in a car, like I talked earlier, getting things in like, you know, I'd like to get a good relationship. Would you like that in mauve, or would you like that, you know, in a chartreuse? Because a relationship is as you say, it's a nominalization, a very fancy word for saying we take a verb and we turn it into an object, a thing. And once again, we can draw one of these circles and we can start to wonder, how often does the person refer to the activities? How often do they refer to some kind of place? How often do they refer to some kind of thing? And I mentioned another one, didn't I, Ron? How often can they refer to information? Now, information is different. It's not a thing. I mean, it might be a thing in the sense you have a book, a piece of paper, on a computer screen, but the paper is not the information. The book is not the information. The computer screen is not the information. The information doesn't have a place. It's not, well, it has a place. It's on the screen. It's on the paper. But the point is, it's not a thing, really. Although people do say, I have a lot of information. It's a different quality, which is why I'm giving it a different category. It's a different quality of experience. And people can do something else. They can make people their object, right? I really like to hang around, verb, people. I like talking with people. And so people can also be a category here. And once again, neurolinguistically, you can appreciate where the person likes to hang out. Say there's going to be a party later on here tonight. And somebody might ask, well, what are we going to do at the party? And that, of course, would be the verb, the activities. And somebody else might ask, who's going to be there? And somebody else might say, that's not a good place for a party. And somebody else might be thinking about, if we had a stereo there, and if we made the lights different, then maybe with these things, we could turn it into a good place. Now, going back to where we started, we all use this subject-verb-object. So to some extent, we're all hanging out in one of these. We're all active to some degree, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Eating, doing the other bodily activities, getting yourself from place to place. Certainly we do all of these. We just find over time, we begin to do some more often than others. And as we do something more often, we do something more often. You know why you do what you do? I got, by the way, this is based on work that I call perceptual cybernetics. Now, why do I call it perceptual cybernetics? Because, first of all, it's perceptual. Now, I mean perceptual like you see, you hear, you feel. So you can count the number. You can listen for the intensity. You can notice the natural ranking. And it's cybernetic because you're in relationship with that other as well. What you do affects them, what they do affects you. If you think of the Donald Trump example and he goes, "You're fired," how often do you think the person on the other end of this goes, I'm going to pretend I'm Donald Trump at this moment? No, they generally play the compliment. They play the compliment to it. They stay to their position. Of course, we also know there's other cases. You can't fire me, I fire you. Which also signals certain perceptual positions. So by hanging out in these, we begin to develop some patterning. And this is what we know. And here's the ranking. And this is what we know. First principle of perceptual cybernetics. You know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. You know? Well, for how many of you, having gone through this stuff called NLP, that when you begin to systematically step into the other person and wonder what they might be thinking and feeling in a situation, that was news of difference. That changed your life. You went, oh, now I get why they were saying, and I don't agree with it completely, but now I can really negotiate this. I get a sense of what's important about this simply by becoming the you. So that you didn't know to do that until you did it. So you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. The NLP technique of the phobia process, which is, of course, somebody that's always in the present. Life. And then they have this fear of snakes or elevators or videotapes. And you teach them to go, get a perspective. Look at it from over here. Far enough back. Is that nice? And as we know, our minds reorganized. It learned that there was another place to go. And so then when something scary comes up, the person can go to this other place. They didn't know to do that. So you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. Second one, Jim. Why do you do what you do? This is the whole theory. You do what you do because you did it before. And the third is that all signage is for the locals. You ever notice that? For the exits, that, it's like in some states, I travel a lot, in some states, they give you about 2 seconds. They go, exit. Or what I like even more is no signs. I'm driving down, it's got 3 lanes going one way, 3 lanes going another. I'm driving for a mile going, is there a sign? If I were king, there would be signs on the roads and numbers on the building. That's my whole platform. What I'm saying here is all signage is for the locals. That happens in the outside world, but it happens in the inside world. Don't you know how important this is to me? Can't you see it from my point of view? Because they assume that you understand that their point of view is most important. Let me tell you more about me. Okay, she says, but not really. So we understand how there can be competing interests. We understand how there can be negotiation. I can come over here because I've seen some responsiveness to hiking and adventuring and doing all these active verbs. And I can come over here and go, I got this place that you might want to go to. He's thinking about it now. The place may be good, maybe not, depends on, and it's really close. Okay, he's still willing to try it on, where there's a lot of people. Okay, he likes people too, this is good. But what I really like about it is there's so much to learn. And you can notice in yourself your own level of interest, as I'm saying, each of those in turn, and realize which one is most important to you. Which one, if we say it another way, is most familiar. Because you've got the neurology and you've got the language, and the programs run fine. They run so fine you don't even notice it when you walk up to somebody and say, who are you? Alessandra. Hi. What do you have? Lots of things. Hi there.
Good morning.
What do you know?
Oh, depends on what you want to find out about.
Okay. And so on. That it stops people a moment when it isn't our usual program. How do you know about another person? From their behavior. But what we're suggesting with the meta programs is that you can know more about what's going on, shall we say, inside, what the leanings and biases are, what has to be there because it's grammatical, and this is just the beginning. We'll take a break. Thanks.